So, today we're going to be talking about why I hate people talking about the mummy's curse or mummy curse theories. I usually call them mummy curse theories because I want to be really clear that these are based in theories. These are not, we don't have a lot of evidence of them. We're going to talk about all the different stuff about examples from antiquity, examples from modern day, lots of different stuff. So I usually like to do mummy curse theories. And we're also going to talk about different curses because there are different ones, and they're not all the same. Sorry. There we go. Oh. Next slide. Alrighty. So, what is a mummy's curse is kind of the big, first definition. Essentially, it is a myth that the pharaohs or any mummy can cast a curse on anyone who disturbs the mummy. Tutti Frutti's curse. What's Tutti Frutti's curse? I actually genuinely want to know. Are you talking about King Tut? Because yes, we are going to talk about King Tut at the end. But if there's anything else called Tutti Frutti that has a curse, I want to know about it. So it's a myth that a pharaoh or any mummy can cast a curse on anyone who disturbs the mummy of an ancient Egyptian. Mainly, this is also about pharaohs. And this curse does not differentiate between thieves and archaeologists, and it is claimed to cause bad luck, illness, or death. The very interesting thing is that I find that when we're talking about curses in ancient Egypt, I find that there are two main ones, which often get confused and conflated together. So let's talk about the mummy, the actual original 1932 mummy. There are books about a mummy coming to life, and then there are also stories about a mummy cursing someone, and then there are the ones where a mummy is coming to life and attacking someone or cursing someone. And so the weird part about it is a lot of people call it the mummy's curse, but somehow also kind of talk about, like with this movie, literally called The Mummy's Curse, where this mummy comes alive. But that's not really what people are mainly talking about when they're talking about a curse. Most of the time they're talking about, especially in reference to King Tutankhamun, and his everything there, they are talking about someone disturbing the remains and then are then cursed in general, when it has nothing to do if the mummy has come alive, if that makes sense. But there are still also things about mummies coming alive might being the curse, and it's very confusing kind of within all that. And there are a couple reasons that suggest that these curses are a cultural and obviously not scientific phenomenon. Number one, these have originated in modern times rather than in antiquity. They have developed primarily in European and some American cultures. There is a constant shift between magic and science for the explanation of these curses, and it is continually used within the horror industry. And that is kind of the modern industry that includes horror books, horror movies, lots of different stuff. Yogi Bear has a curse of the Tutti Frutti episode. Of course he does. That makes a lot of sense. That makes a lot of sense for Yogi Bear. And so these are just some, the one on the far right annoys me the most, because from what it looks like, it is a graphic novel called The Mummy's Curse, but also discovering King Tut's tomb. And so I'm very nervous to see what is in this graphic novel, because I have a feeling it has nothing to do with the actual discovery of King Tut's tomb, and that it's going to be a little bit more fictionalized. And this Unexplained Mysteries, The Mummy's Curse, is kind of one of those weird Guinness Book of World Record, like mystery kind of books, like compilation books almost. And yeah, it's just not that great. So before we talk about the more modern stuff, there are occasional instances of ancient curses. And by these I mean phrases and or prayers to protect an ancient Egyptian deceased person, a mummy. And many of these do sound quite threatening, which is why they have been interpreted as curses. So first we have the mastaba of Kentika oh gosh, this guy's name. Mastaba of Kentika Ikhekihi. This was a tomb of a 6th dynasty man, probably a noble, and it is located in Saqqara. You can see the mastaba here, and you can actually see right here, this appears to be this same inscription, or maybe this one, but you can see different images of him seated, and then actually this one right here looks like this. Because you can see the tiny little seated man and the big seated man, maybe, if you guys can see that close. So this is what was written, and granted, remember these have been translated, and remember that some of these translations are quite archaic. You can usually tell by some particular words that they may have been translated when this was discovered. You can see all these photos are in black and white because this is coming from a particularly old publication. If this was at Saqqara, it could have been the early 1900s when this was excavated. So this curse says, "As for all men who shall enter this my tomb impure, there will be judgment, an end shall be made for him. I shall seize his neck like a bird. I shall cast the fear of myself into him." Yeah, it is pretty rare to see this much. There is a lot of decoration. I don't know. I'm just based on some of the looking of this, I don't know how much of this is reconstructed. Because obviously there are some mastabas that don't even have roofs. So I'm not sure how, well, actually this all has to be reconstructed now that I'm thinking about it. This area all on the top with the bricks. But yeah, it is pretty rare to see. So this is, I'm going to type the name, and this is obviously an anglicized name. So this is Kentika Iheki, a noble of Saqqara. He might have a particular title. I just haven't written it down. So again, I'll read out the curse or whatever. "As for all men who shall enter this my tomb, ... impure ... there will be judgment ... an end shall be made for him ... I shall seize his neck like a bird ... I shall cast the fear of myself into him." The curse in this case appears to be directed at the Ka priests, who so that they can protect his tomb carefully. So if you guys didn't know this, this isn't a universal rule, but a lot of the times we'll say in most of the Old Kingdom, many Egyptians would live on the eastern half. They would live on the they would live on the eastern half of the Nile, and the majority of burial practices and where people would be buried was on the west side of the Nile. So this is in Saqqara, so this is near a lot of the big pyramids of the late Old Kingdom, and going into like the Middle Kingdom. And what would happen is there would be priests that would stay, like maybe on kind of week-long shifts or something like that, over on that west side of the Nile, and they would take care of all of the tombs there. Essentially, they would make sure nobody breaks into it. They would clean them. Many of these tombs would sometimes have little courtyards, or they would have little rooms that people could come and visit. Many of the mastabas, they would have, like you can see this door, he probably has a small little chapel inside, but then the actual person would have been buried in a tomb shaft underneath it that would have been sealed. So these places where they would be buried would be frequented by family members and friends, and they would bring offerings, and bread and beer are two of the really big ones, and then you can get fruits and vegetables and cuts of meat and stuff like that. But those offerings that people left at those tombs were that was the payment for those priests that stayed over there. If you didn't know, Egypt is not a money-bearing system up until the Greek period, so it was a complete barter system. And so priests would frequently let the food stay out for maybe a couple days for at least the essence to get to the deceased, and then they would take that food, and that would be their payment for taking care of the tomb and keeping it clean. And yeah, and so I was saying, in certain periods, there were full villages built for the mortuary cults as well. In some of these more isolated areas, they might be living in small huts, taking shifts. It kind of just depends on the area. And we don't have a lot of good we have villages and stuff like that, but not as much concrete evidence. So this curse seems to be it obviously seems to be directed at anybody who could enter the tomb, but it also seems to be specifically asked of the actual priest, saying, hey, take care of my tomb, don't steal anything, or else I'm going to come and get you. And so it obviously is threatening, and you could say that is a curse, but it's more on, it's a threat in my opinion, rather than I'm cursing you. Because I kind of want to look up the definition for curse. Excuse me while I don't know what the like actual definition of a curse is, in like changing it from a solemn utterance intended to invoke a supernatural power to inflict harm or punishment on someone or something. So yeah, so they're saying like a supernatural power. And in this case, he says, an end shall be made for him. I shall seize his neck like a bird. I shall cast fear of myself into him. Like, yes, somebody could make the argument that he is deceased. He is now in the afterlife. That includes some sort of supernatural power that he would have to come from the afterlife to take care of anybody who entered their tomb. But you could also say that he's not asking other supernatural powers to affect a person who goes in his tomb. He is doing the inflicting. Hi 5454 Espionage. We're doing a lecture right now. I'm talking about mummy curse theories. Right now we're talking about curses, examples from antiquity, from the actual ancient Egyptian period where we have these things that look like curses, and then we're going to be talking about more modern versions of Egyptian curses. But thank you for joining. So then, I don't know if I have a picture of it. Oh, I do. Okay. So then we have the tomb of Ankh-Tifi. So this is a tomb that dates to the 9th to the 10th dynasty. And he was a nomarch from Hierakonpolis. I actually had to study this tomb a lot because on one of the walls of this tomb, he has this enormous battle scene of all of these different men, archers, like heading into battle, and almost every single one of them has a dog with him. This is not a very well preserved tomb, but I had to do a lot of research on this tomb for my thesis. So the curse that is featured in this tomb says, any ruler who shall do evil or wickedness to this coffin, may Hemen not accept any goods he offers, and may his heir not inherit. So Hemen is a local deity to Hierakonpolis, and so essentially this falls a little bit... well, thank you, Sharon. Thank you, Sharon, for joining us for the live. So Hemen is a local deity to Hierakonpolis. So this one does touch a little bit more on that supernatural entity that kind of falls into what the definition of a curse is. He essentially is just like, may this god not accept any offerings from you who have done this deed to my coffin, and may you not have any heirs. He's almost cursing him to not have any more children, which is kind of interesting. And so this is a little bit, it is threatening, it is a little bit of a warning. I will say yes, this kind of falls into that curse. Hi Alex, welcome. It's okay, we're making this very casual because I was worried that this is going to go very quickly. So y'all can ask any questions at any time. But welcome. We're just finishing up the examples from antiquity, and then we're going to go into the modern accounts, which are a little bit more interesting. So we do have these two examples that are, we'll say threats, we'll say curses that are threats to anybody who disturbs the tomb or disturbs the coffin. But curses after the Old Kingdom are very, very rare. I couldn't find any more like nicely written or nicely translated versions of these curses. But some that I find generally say that they invoke the wrath of Thoth or the destruction of Sekhmet. Again, to a god and goddess who Sekhmet is known to be a destructor woman, and Thoth is the god of writing and the god of history, and so it's almost fitting to understand that you could invoke his wrath. He could write you out of history or write you kind of out of that. They think he's like kind of the scribe who recorded all of history and kind of like that. And so I can understand those two. But we don't have as many examples that are more concrete in this more like curse theory. There is none for Tut. I will just say that right now. We have no written quote unquote curse for King Tutankhamun's tomb. Mostly because his tomb is completely undecorated and there is very little text in the tomb and nothing says that. Thank you so much, Archaeist, for the follow. Welcome to the stream. We are doing a lecture. We're talking about mummy curse theories. And we've just finished with the examples from antiquity. So let's start talking about the various different mummy or modern accounts. Yeah, with the exception of the burial chamber. But as many people would say, you would expect that curse to be out on the front, would be out somewhere. Even in Assassin's Creed Odyssey or Origins, all four of those, almost all of those tombs that are in the Valley of the Kings, when you go up to it, there is a writing on the outside that is like literally like a curse. And I'm like, those do not exist. No, sir, those are not there. That's okay. Welcome to the stream. The modern accounts are more interesting anyway. It's essentially that we have some examples of threats or curses that are in places of tombs, but they're very rare and they mainly come from the Old Kingdom. And there's none from Tut's, which we will talk about Tut's. So let's talk about the mummy curses in modern accounts. So, in general, the myth of a mummy's curse did not exist before the translation of Egyptian hieroglyphs, which makes sense in some ways. But we don't have any evidence of any of these curse theories coming out until the translation of Egyptian hieroglyphs, which would have been in 1822, I believe, because they just celebrated the 200th anniversary of Champollion's discovery a couple years ago. So it would have been around, I guess, 1820s or so, I think. Granted, he did the very basics. It probably took another 10, 20, 30 years to get even more than one person understanding how to translate it. So any reports that are based before this are usually purely based on bad luck rather than any written text. That's like the basis. There are some little rumors, but they are very much based in like, oh, bad luck, something bad happened to you and you just happen to go to Egypt, it must be a curse, kind of things like that. Nothing before that time is based on any texts. So many people assume that the myth of the mummy's curse begins with the discovery of King Tutankhamun, and that is incorrect. There are actually two earlier examples of a mummy's curse before 1920. So let's go to the first one. And this is a very poignant one, and we will talk a lot about this because I'm sure a lot of people have very many questions. Thomas Douglas Murray was a British amateur archaeologist. He most likely purchased this mummy board from Egypt in either the 1860s or the 1870s. A mummy board, for anybody who does not know what that is during a certain time period, which based off of looking at that is, we're going to guess third intermediate period, or maybe New Kingdom. It's definitely not Middle Kingdom. It's definitely Middle Kingdom it's definitely New Kingdom and after. A mummy board was essentially a small piece of wood that would be placed above the mummy, but was not a complete second coffin. So there would be the sarcophagus, and then there would be the mummy would be placed into it, and then a mummy board on top, and then the lid on top. So right in the middle, this is what a mummy board is. So the mummy board that you see here was most likely purchased in Egypt in the 1860s or 1870s. It is not actually clear if Thomas Douglas Murray was the one who purchased it, because it might actually have been a man named Mr. W, because who knows. Why is this not... This doesn't look like it is complete. Give me 1 second. I'm wondering if I wrote this. No, don't put up my notes in front of everyone. Well then. The functionality of a mummy board is probably just another piece to protect the mummy. And it is probably a way to save on wood, so that you didn't have to do one coffin inside of another coffin, which was very popular around that time. So I'm going to assume it is saving on the wood element, because again, the majority of a lot of, if you didn't know, Egypt does not have very good wood, and I didn't realize that everyone can see. That's fine. They do not have very good wood, and so a lot of their wooden pieces, unless you were a pharaoh and you could afford to literally import a full cedar tree from like Lebanon or Israel or something, you would have to go and essentially piece together all of the different pieces. And so you would literally have to piece together all of them, then it would be plastered over, and then it would all be painted a one like solid yellow color almost, so that it looked like a full coffin, but it was not. So hysterically, I don't know why I don't have all the notes about this, but I also did a Instagram post about it, and now I'm just looking for the post, but unfortunately I sorted all of these by weeks, and oh my god, I'm never gonna find it. I love how I said that I was just gonna wing it, and now I am not prepared. Are you kidding me? At this point, we could just read it off of my Instagram. It was one of my Fun Fact Fridays. Unwrapping parties, shipwreck sailor. Oh wait, is this it? This is it. Okay. Let's see if I have this document. I might print that. I might print this really quick. Print. Alright, I don't know why this... I don't know. But, the interesting thing with this mummy board is that it became the center of a very large mummy curse theory. Oh, party foul. Melissa forgot that her printer was printing in small little cards because she never fixed it. Isn't this fun, guys? Isn't this fun that we remember things like this, like in the middle of the stream, and Melissa doesn't correct them before? Don't we love everything? I need to pull up my printer. No, go away. We're gonna just chat just for a second while I fix everything, because I've ruined everything. Printer. Where's my printer settings? Oh my god, what? Alright. Small technical difficulties because Melissa messed things up. Print. Okay. Let's see if that works better. Okay. I just can't believe I gave this lecture to y'all 2 years ago and just the paragraph just didn't finish. Like the note just like stops. It just says the owner blank. Okay. So the thing that is super interesting about, as I go back to this mummy board, is that the mummy board became a center of a huge mummy curse theory surrounding, you guessed it, the Titanic. And it is a very remarkable story, and I was very tempted to make a video about it on TikTok about with all of the stuff talking about obviously the Titanic and the Ocean Gate thing. I was very tempted to make another a video about this, but I don't like spreading mummy curse theories unless we're sitting in a conversation like this where we can all talk about it and stuff before we talk about theories and blah 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 blah. So I'm now realizing I might have just read y'all out my Instagram post about this, because I did 4 posts about this because it was so interesting and long. So I might just read this out to you guys as it continues to print, because it was several pages longer than I expected. Haha. So the mummy board right now is at the British Museum, and you can go and see it. This is the last page. Okay. All right. So, this mummy board has been slightly dubbed the Unlucky Mummy. This dates stylistically to the late 21st and early 22nd dynasty of the Third Intermediate Period. I was correct. It has been presumed that it was made for a high-ranking woman, sometimes referred to as the Chantress, though there is no title present. Yeah, it won't let you leave. No, you're not allowed to leave. So this is still at the British Museum, and there are a lot of inconsistencies with this story, so bear with me. As I mentioned, It might have been purchased by Thomas Douglas Murray, but it might have been purchased by a man named Mr. W. So, as the owner, whoever purchased this, as this person was returning from Egypt with this new mummy board, many members of his party were injured, including the owner himself. Murray was either shot accidentally by his servant or his arm was severely injured while shooting. Again, the stories are inconsistent and who knows really how accurate they actually are. Nonetheless, depending on if his servant shot him or if he was injured while he was shooting, his arm had to be amputated after it became infected. And then one or two of his friends may have died from either poverty shortly after, and a third friend was also shot. So there's accidentally shot by his servant. Yeah, it's so inconsistent that but it appears that himself and many of his friends may have all fallen Harusakamon. That would have been a very crazy end of the story. But I'm going to guess that he did not, because they did not know the modern mummifying techniques that the ancients did. So obviously there is just all of these different stories of the original party that we assume that these three to four men were all traveling together, and either Thomas Murray or Mr. W purchased this and then all kind of went to crap when they were still in Egypt or coming back from Egypt. And then afterwards, this mummy board seems to have had a long history of anybody who interacted with it something bad would happen to them. So apparently a journalist at one point borrowed it, and then his mother fell down a set of stairs and died. That journalist's fiance called off their relationship, and her dogs went mad, and then his fiance fell ill. It seems that Mr. Murray, I think the main theory is that it's unclear if Mr. Murray was the one who purchased it from Egypt and then received it and then was purchased, or he purchased it from a Mr. W and then he was injured. It's kind of a little hazy. We do know that Mr. Murray gave the board to a Mr. Wheeler, also where this Mr. W might come into play, very confusing, and Mr. Wheeler died not long after he received it. The board was then given to his sister, Mrs. Warwick Hunt, and while she owned it, her family suffered a series of financial losses. All of these injuries, deaths, and misfortunes, of course, were attributed to the mummy board's curse. When Mrs. Hunt took it to be photographed, the photographer reportedly captured a living woman's face in the photograph and then died shortly after, just to add to the craziness. Remember, this is the 1860s, 1870s, 1880s, probably, in England. Both Murray and the celebrated clairvoyant, Madame Helene Blavatsky, told Mrs. Hunt to dispose of it, after Helena specifically felt an evil influence over this mummy board. Because of this, Mrs. Hunt donated it to the British Museum in July of 1889. Apparently, though, an Egyptologist who acted as a middleman in this purchase, the carrier who took the board to the museum, and another photographer of this mummy board all died shortly after encountering the mummy board. Now, Mr. E.A. Wallace Budge, who was an Egyptologist at the British Museum, he later became the director of the British Museum, and he is notoriously, we don't like, modern Egyptologists do not respect his writings, mainly his translations, because they were coming from a time that was very shortly after the discovery of hieroglyphs, so they're just very inaccurate based off of our modern conceptions of it. My professor told us that we could use his transcriptions of the actual glyphs, because he said that those were relatively accurate, but that we would never use translations of him. And to be honest, I'd never heard him say anything about using his writings about Egypt in general. I have a lot of Budge books, but I mostly do that because I'm buying them so people don't read them and think that they're real. But I haven't really heard an opinion of what we should do about his other writings, about like Egyptian religion or Egyptian history or anything like that. Mainly my writing professor was like, do not use his translations. So he was the one at the British, who was working at the British Museum at the time. He was the one who received it. And he appears to have given this mummy board its own case at the time, a own glass case that it could be displayed in. And it is possibly that he did appease this to appease the goddess. And apparently, night staff at the British Museum continue to see ghostly appearances around this mummy board. Although there are more reported misfortunes attached to the mummy board, the piece has only left the British Museum 4 times since 1889. It was removed for safekeeping during World War I and World War II, and it was part of an exhibition in 1990 to Australia and in 2007 to Taiwan. So it's only left the British Museum 4 times. Shun the unclean one, he uses the forbidden text. Harasakamon, that is a very valid question. Obviously in a time period prior to that, that was not done. Sending things back to Egypt, sending things back to the place of origin were not done, especially by the British Museum. And then after the British Museum wrote it into their own museum policies that they would never return anything back, it was obviously never going to be returned. But yeah, it is a very interesting case that honestly, it just shows that they don't believe the curse is real. These are all coming from outside people that like, they don't think it's that cursed. So they didn't see a reason to return it. But that's definitely not the total reason, because the British Museum never returns anything. So very rarely returns anything, we'll say. Just to be in general. So most notably, I'm also trying to see if I have another picture. Okay, here's Budge. So, and I'm going to assume this is from 2007 when I'm going to assume this is from 2007 when I went to Taiwan. So most notably, this mummy board has been linked to the death of a British writer. Let me see if I have a picture of him. Yeah, I think this is him. This has been linked to the death of British writer and journalist Bertram Fletcher Robinson. He looks like a teacher and it's cool. Yeah. Are you talking about the actual board? Yeah, go back. Yeah, it's very thin. It's literally just, unless you're talking about Mr. Budge. Mr. Budge was not. He reminds me a lot of Howard Taft. But yes, this is very, very thin. I'm trying to figure out, those are photos. They're photos. This is probably, what I'm going to assume is that this is them examining it to make sure that it is stable to transport. And this looks like an image of it in Taiwan. But yeah, it's very, very thin. So, most notably, this mummy board has been linked to the death of a British writer and journalist named Bertram Fletcher Robinson. He was the writer for a magazine called the Daily Express and was writing a piece on the history of this actual artifact in an attempt to disprove some of the different legends that it has around it. He attempted to write this in 1904. He visited the mummy board at the British Museum and became convinced that the unlucky mummy had malevolent powers. So he came to disprove it, quickly switched sides. And unfortunately, Robinson... Oh yes, sorry. I did not explain that, but I will show you. Essentially, it's meant to imitate that the hands are like this. A lot of people think that hands like this only mean royalty, and that is not always consistent. But it's hard to picture, but sometimes they'll show you the full arms. In this case, they're just showing you the hands, mimicking that shroud is covering their whole like arms and stuff. So sometimes the hands are attached separately, and so sometimes you actually see you can actually date particular coffins, whether or not they're showing their hands or not, or if you can tell their hands are completely detached and stuff. But yeah, I haven't talked about this mummy board that much. It's just we know it's from the Third Intermediate period, which is a period that they were using very heavy decoration all over the mummy board and the mummy coffin as well. So he was attempting to write this article about this mummy board in 1904, but after he kind of went and saw it, he kind of seemed like he switched sides, and he actually died 3 years later at the age of 36. His piece was later published in the 1909 edition of Pearson's Magazine, which you can see here. Now, a close friend of Robinson was Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, the famous writer of the Sherlock Holmes books, and he was very upset about Robinson's death and was convinced that it had to do with the mummy board. And here is a quote from Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. It was caused by Egyptian elementals guarding a female mummy because Mr. Robinson had begun an investigation of the stories of the mummy's malevolence. It is impossible to say with absolute certainty if this is true, but I warned Mr. Robinson against concerning himself with the mummy at the British Museum. He persisted, and his death occurred. I told him he was tempting fate by pursuing his inquiries. The immediate cause of death was typhoid fever, but that is the way in which the elementals guarding the mummy might act. So, if you didn't know, Sir Arthur Conan Doyle was a huge mystic. I don't know a lot about it, but I know that he was really big into mysticism and ghosts and lots of fun things like that. So this is not unlike him to kind of say that, oh yeah, this guy didn't die from typhoid fever. This guy was cursed by a mummy. Which is just, I mean, it's 3 years after he attempted to write this article. So, I don't know. That's my own thing. If this was any other person, yes, very much so. And you will find that that is a very common thing with the mummy curse, is that they are going to say, even if that person died several years after they encountered a mummy, a cursed mummy, they will say it's still the cursed. You're very true, Pfizer. Many people were very much into mysticism, which is why it did catch on. But yeah, so supposedly this guy died because of this mummy board that he was researching for this article. The article, I think I found access to almost a full version of this article from 1909, and it's very interesting. So then we get to, I mean, this curse theory goes on for years. Remember, it was given to the British Museum in 1889. We're now at 1909. And then we get to the sinking of the Titanic and how this poor little mummy board was blamed for the whole thing. So this is probably the most popular rumor that surrounded this particular mummy board. But there is one huge fatal flaw with this theory that we are going to talk about. So, supposedly, this mummy board was on the Titanic and it was cursed, which made the Titanic sink. But, as I said, this mummy board was on display in Australia in 1990 and in 2007 in Taiwan. So why is this mummy board not at the bottom of the ocean? Because it was never on the Titanic. And so this is probably one of my favorite theories because we almost have direct evidence as to where this rumor came from. And I think that is just really cool that we've done enough research to be able to pinpoint exactly where this rumor almost came from. So, the rumor was apparently started by a journalist named William Stead. And it was an accidental rumor. This was not a malicious, started for that time. So This was supposedly accidentally started by a journalist named William Stead and another man named Douglas Murray. And I will say, it is totally unclear if this is the same Douglas Murray that supposedly purchased this. It is not clear if these are the same thing. But Stead and Murray knew of the story of this mummy, or the spirit of this mummy. So they had heard all these different stories about the misfortune that this mummy came around. And then they've also heard about lots of stories that this mummy would break anything in a room, like if it was in a room or something, and it would bring illness and misfortune to anyone who had in contact with it. And so they knew of this theory. It doesn't exactly say that it's about this mummy board, but they knew that this one was probably the only one that was mainly being talked about, so it's most likely that they're talking about this specific mummy board. So William Stead was a passenger on the RMS Titanic in 1912 because he was going to take part in a in a peace conference in New York City at the request of President Taft. So he was like kind of big up there. He was this journalist, but I think he always kind of advocated for like peace and a lot of stuff. And so he was asked to be at this conference, this Congress with President Taft. And supposedly the night the Titanic sunk, so the night before, kind of, because I think it sunk in the early morning, he supposedly told the tale of this cursed mummy over the 11-course dinner with the highest classes of people on the ship. And as the ship sunk, he supposedly helped many women and children to safety before eventually going down with the ship. Because again, he was a richer, high-class man. Many of the people that were saved from the ship were only women and children of the highest classes as well. So when the remaining survivors reached New York, there was one survivor who told a newspaper about the cursed mummy that Stead had told everyone about. And somewhere essentially around the rumor train was that the mummy that he was talking about was on board the Titanic. And that is kind of where that confusion fell, is that he was telling this really fantastical story about this mummy board, which appeared to all be true, supposedly, because he was hearing about this, and we have evidence that people thought this thing was cursed years before 1912. But what appears to have happened is that either he said something, so it's either that he said that it was on board, I don't know, maybe he wanted to zhuzh it up a little bit, and he goes, and it's aboard this very ship. Maybe he said it, or maybe the person who is recounting this story is so traumatized that they said it, or maybe a reporter says it. So like maybe the reporter took that story and just added one little sentence, it was on the ship. And so we have these several different articles. One is here in French, and then this is William Stead in the center. And I want to read just a little portion of this article because I can actually read it. But it says, the malignant mummy of the British Museum has finally met her fate. Edgar Davis, photographer at the immense treasure house, told me how and why. Do I seem a sensible man? Demanded Mr. Davis. Then believe me or no, but do not scoff. I am still afraid of the mummified priestess of the sun. Listen, 10 years ago, an English landowner brought the mummy from Egypt to adorn his hall. Report declared that the mummy's 5 discoverers, 2 had almost immediately lost their fortunes, 1 had suffered an amputation of the arm, 1 had been blinded by an explosive, and 1 met a mysterious death. Within 6 months, the Englishman's fortune was lost on the stock exchange. Worried by misfortune, he grew nervous about the mummy and presented it to the British Museum. That week, his luck changed. He is again a rich man. Within a month of the 4 porters who carried the mummy into the Egyptian room, 2 were dead, and 1 had broken his arms. I knew the men and their stories, but I laughed at the legend. It became my business to photograph the priestess of Amun-Ra, which again is something that they said, but this mummy does not actually have a title, so they are making crap up back in this time. A lot of pieces like this, when you couldn't readily have someone who could easily translate something, you hear it all the time. Priestess of Amun-Ra, Chantress. If they can tell it's a woman, they'll say it's a priest or a priestess. Like it's really easy. Thank you, Alex. Yeah, it's really just like wild. Essentially the camera discovered that the mummy case was inscribed with a horary curse. More surprising still, the photograph of the bland wooden face developed that of a fierce malignant woman. I laughed while I took that picture. A few weeks later, I was blind, is what this little article says. A clergyman who came to comfort me told me the story of an Egyptian priestess. He had taken 20 children into the museum, advising them not to tarry in the Egyptian room, but one little girl saucily stuck out her tongue at the malign mummy. Next day, the child was armless from a motor accident. I could tell you 50 similar stories. There was no hiding the horror of such happiness. Attendants in the Egyptian department petitioned to the mummy's trustees. 2 of their number have died of mysterious circumstances since the arrival of the mummy. The rest live in fear. So that article was not actually about the Titanic. I wish I could read the one above it, but it obviously says the world famous hoodoo mummy, a secret passenger on the Titanic. And this one says La Mummy Fatale. And stuff. So it's like this really just became this huge big thing that this mummy board took down, essentially, the Titanic. One of the craziest things of this entire story is obviously that the mummy board never left the British Museum, and the rumors got so bad that Wallace Budge had to release a disclaimer about the mummy board in 1934. So still 20 years later, 20 years after the Titanic, he had to release a statement essentially saying, this mummy board is still here. It has never left. Like, this is not cursed. Like, he had to release this like actual statement about people just like freaking out about this mummy. And one of the other wild things is that because of these rumors, there was a severe increase in donations to the British Museum by people who had either been to Egypt or had been given things from Egypt. And this included like mummified hands, mummies, and also just small random trinkets like shabtis, pieces of pottery, like even things that like would not be like I can understand somebody being like, okay, you know what, I'm not comfortable having a mummified hand anymore if this thing is gonna curse me. But like random Egyptian objects, there was a severe increase of donations of these objects to the British Museum. Essentially, again, the process of donation back then was literally like they would just mail it to the British Museum and write a letter saying, I don't want this, take it, please. So that's a whole big thing. I want to see if there's anything that I missed, but I think I got everything. Oh yeah, supposedly Murray and Stead wanted to have a seance around the mummy board, and the British Museum turned them down, so that's good. But yeah, so this is one of the craziest stories of mummy curses, and it's one of the earliest. It's one of the earliest we have. Again, a lot of people think that it started with King Tut. It did not. King Tut was 1922. This is 1889 to 1912 or so. So this had absolutely nothing to do with King Tut before even King Tut knew what was going on. So then we get to another mummy curse that is prior to the discovery of King Tut. So this is Walter Henry Ingram was the youngest son of the founder of the Illustrated London News. In 1885, he volunteered to join the Gordon Relief Expedition in Egypt. And this was a doomed military dash to rescue a man named General Gordon, who essentially was a nutty evangelist who was in Khartoum while there was an Islamic uprising. And so this group went to go and try to save this guy. After Walter Henry Ingham fought, he brought back a mummy case that he bought for around 50 pounds at the time. And it was said that there was a fearful inscription on the case. And 3 years later, after he purchased this, he was trampled by an elephant outside of Berbera in what was then Somaliland. They were apparently elephant hunting, and he forgot a gun. And this was apparently the fulfillment of this curse. 3 years later, again, I'm telling you, this always happens. This always happens where they buy the thing and it's years later that the fulfillment of the curse, it just took 3 years for the mummy to get around to it. His body was never found. Only a sock and a part of a human bone was ever found, because it looks like that a flood took most of his remains away. So he had actually given the mummy away in 1886, and he died in 1888. So the weirdest thing is that, of course, he purchased it if it was 3 years before, he purchased it in 1885, he gave the mummy away in 1886, and he died in 1888, which to me would mean that the curse has now passed on to the current owner. But I digress. Yeah, it took a few years for the mummy to get around it. I mean, it's like the stupidest, goddamn things that just, annoy the crap out of me, because I'm like, if you're gonna get cursed, the mummy's gotta get around to it sooner rather than later. Really, it just doesn't make any sense to me. So he had given this away a year after he purchased it. But because he came from this hugely newspaper family, his family was this newspaper tycoon, his death was highly, highly publicized. And apparently, I'm hoping that is, it says Kipling, so I'm assuming it's Rudyard Kipling. There's a statue of General Gordon in my town? No way. I have to look up more about this, because it seems weird that I wrote a nutty evangelist, General Gordon, but I do need to look up him a little bit. So apparently Rudyard Kipling heard the tale in a London club, and then sent the gory details to a fellow writer named Rider Haggard. So this is the mummy. So this is, you can see the image of the, I don't know if there's an actual mummy in this. I'm going to assume there is, based off of there being a mummy mask. So if you guys didn't know, it is really, really common for mummies and sarcophagi and coffins that were purchased for them to either not include a mummy, for them to include a random mummy that had no association with it, that the seller may have literally just put another mummy in there in the coffin, or if they buy a coffin set, sometimes the coffins are not the same, they're not meant for the same people, and that could either have been because of reuse in antiquity, or literally sellers just piecing together pieces to make them more expensive, to make them more fancy. These people have anything to do with this mummy should be wearing coffins for clothes. I mean, yeah, they're spending a crap ton of money on these. But so because there's a mummy mask associated with this, I would assume that there was a mummy at one point, because they wouldn't have just sold a coffin and a mummy mask without the mummy, in my opinion. And obviously the one from the previous story was just a mummy board. It didn't even come with a real coffin. So the mummy has traveled through quite a few museums. It was originally given to Lady Valerie Mew, and then when she died in 1910, rumors continued to come out about the story, and her husband died in 1900, and she never had children. So that must be the mummy curse, right? And the British Museum would not accept this mummy. I'm going to assume based off of the rumors and based off of all the other problems they were having with the mummy board. They did not accept this mummy for donation. So the coffin is actually called the Coffin of Nessim, and it is now in the Rhode Island School of Design. And we know that this mummy was a priest. And the... Why? I don't understand any of my notes. This is hysterical. Let me see if we can find... I just want to look and see if I can find anything about the Coffin of Nessim. Nesmin. Coffin of Nesmin. Rhode Island. Again, another museum that I have to go to. Is this the same one? I'm literally looking at it back and forth trying to figure out if this is the same one. It is. I guess it is. Here's the coffin on their website. He's got some freaky looking eyes, but it has a pretty good, it's got a nice image of, I don't know, a goddess on the inside. I can't tell which one. Jed pillar on the back. It's very detailed. I'm going to assume third intermediate period as well. Oh, no, not third intermediate period. That's even later. That's like late period. Oh, look at that. That's a lot of other gods and goddesses. It is on view. I'm just wondering. Sometimes their websites don't give a lot of found at Thebes, which is pretty standard. This doesn't mention it at all, and now I'm worried that this is actually not. Oh, so the mummy of Nesmin. So they have a mummy. They apparently have a mummy, so that's interesting. Ptolemaic, yeah, that time period would be Ptolemaic. Rhode Island School of Design. Okay, so yeah, here's the whole thing. Walter Herbert Ingram purchased the mummy in 1885, passed it on to Lady Valerie Mieux. Surprisingly, this article doesn't mention the curse at all, which is hysterical. But yeah, I found evidence of it, that people thought this thing was cursed. There's another coffin of Nesmin. It's very weird that I didn't find anything about the curse. But yeah, so another cursed object. Probably Newt. Yeah, she didn't. Well, she has a sun disk. Newt doesn't usually have a sun disk, but I'm not as familiar as how goddesses and gods are depicted with in the Ptolemaic anime girls on the inside. Oh, this is a different one, Alex. This is a different Nesmin. But thank you. But yeah, this is a different Nesmin at the Met. So let us continue on and talking about mummy curse theories based on fiction. And this is kind of where everything continues to kind of spiral almost. So The idea of reviving a mummy from the dead, which remember I described that there are these two different curse theories almost, where they talk about either a deceased Egyptian person is going to curse someone who has touched or affected their remains, their coffin, their tomb. And then there are a lot of other things that are about mummies coming back to life to attack you and to be mean and to all of that. And a lot of people call that a mummy's curse as well, which I don't think it technically falls into, but I think it's interesting to talk about nonetheless, because you'll kind of get both of those things. Like you'll hear mummy's curse and you'll hear different things about like what a mummy's curse is. So many of the fictionalized versions are more focused on the mummy coming back to life to kill you, rather than the I'm just going to curse you from the afterlife. So the first book that has ever featured the trope of a mummy coming back to life is this one here, which I also have a copy of. I have not attempted to read it because I tried to attempt to read the first sentence and it was very, let's say, antiquarian type, I guess, voice, and I could not focus on it. So this book is called The Mummy, A Tale of a 22nd Century, and this you can actually read on Project Gutenberg online. So if you don't want to buy this copy, this is obviously a reprinted copy that I bought off of Amazon a couple of years ago, but they do have this on Project Gutenberg because it is so old. This was published in 1827. And I did actually want to bring up, I wanted to bring up this lady's Wikipedia page and talk about this book a little bit because it is wildly, wildly interesting. So this it was originally published in a 3-volume set by a woman named Jane Webb, who was later Jane C. London. It concerns the Egyptian mummy Cheops, which is the Greek name for the Egyptian pharaoh Khufu. And he is apparently brought back to life in the year, get this, 2126. So this novel describes a future filled with advanced technology, and again, this was the first English language story to feature a reanimated mummy. And this is just, I mean, some of the crazy things that happen in this book, supposedly based on like what I've been reading online about it, is actually kind of insane. So Jane most likely drew her inspiration from the generalized Egyptomania that kind of came out of French research coming out of the Napoleon invasion of Egypt and the Napoleonic expedition. And then we also have lots of, at that time in 1821, there were public unwrappings of Egyptian mummies in England. And then you also have in 1818, Frankenstein was published. And so we kind of have this generalized early science fiction kind of stories, and so she might have been inspired by this. But one of the things I just wanted to read off of this, so unlike Frankenstein, the hideous revived Cheops is not shuffling around dealing out horror and death, but giving canny advice on politics and life to those who befriend him. And so some people have said that this is a reaction to themes that are seen in Frankenstein, where her mummy specifically says that he is allowed life only by divine favor rather than being indisputably vivified by mortal science. And so it's kind of this weird take on Frankenstein. But I want to talk about some of the weird technology things that she talks about because it is a little bit wild. So she did not portray the future as her own as her own day with only like say political changes. She did like this crazy like advanced technology, like it's like 2001 Space Odyssey, like the Jetsons, like things like that. So the hero of the book is named Edric Montague, and he lived in a peaceful and Catholic England under the rule of Queen Claudia. Catholic England, remember that, which is wild. Her court ladies wear trousers and hair ornaments of controlled flame. Surgeons and lawyers have steam-powered automatons. There is air travel by balloon. And she kind of also predicted a kind of internet in this book. Kind of talking about like a world wide web where knowledge is accessible. Not really in the sense of a computer, but like, I don't know exactly what it is, but she does kind of predict this kind of web of knowledge. And she embodied ideas of scientific progress and discovery that nowadays, as we look back on it, read like prophecies. Like she talks about things that did kind of happen. Wildly though, this book is ranked around many feminist authors. So in just talking about her and herself, because she's a very interesting person, she after she wrote this book, she was how old? She was only about 20 when she wrote this book. She was born in 1807 in Birmingham. And she wrote a little poetry book in 1824, but then she changed and she did this book. And this is one thing that this is a quote from her. I had written a strange, wild novel called The Mummy, in which I had laid the scene in the 22nd century and attempted to predict the state of improvement to which this country might possibly arrive. But she only had a couple other books, and then essentially she married a Scottish botanist and then wrote a whole slew of books about flowers and botany and drawings and stuff. But the weirdest part about this entire thing is her later husband was named John Claudius London. He was a botanist and a horticulturist, but he was one of the reviewers of this book. And essentially, he attempted to seek out the author, which I think was put on under a pen name. The Wikipedia does not say what pen name, but I am going to be... It was published by Henry Colburn in a 3-volume novel, but it doesn't say if it was published under a pseudonym, but I'm going to assume it was, because according to Wikipedia, he attempted to seek out the author because he liked this book so much, and he assumed that it was written by a man, and he eventually met Jane in February 1830, a couple years after she published it, and they married in September. And he was 46 and she was like 22 or something. But they seem to be very happy. But it also is so weird to me that that essentially he was like this reviewer, and he really liked the book and he wanted to talk to her and he thought it was a man, and then they fell in love. So this is another quote. Among the other foreshadowings of things that were to be was a steam plow, and this attracted attention to Mr. John C. London, whose numerous and valuable works on gardening, agriculture, etc. are so well known, led to an acquaintance which terminated in a matrimonial connection. So it literally was that he had no interest in the mummy, but he had so much interest that she predicted a steam plow. I don't know why, but I really love this. Like, it's still weird, the age gap, but like there's something so funny about this, that he's just like, oh my god, a steam plow? That sounds so amazing. I want to talk to the author of this. And then they supposedly fell in love and got married. Yeah, he's a steam plow fanboy, which is it's very funny to me because my great-grandfather was a huge green thumb and has passed that down like pretty much through all of our generations, and this just seems like something that my great-grandfather would have done. He's like, oh my god, a steam plow would have revolutionized everything. Like that just like makes so much sense in my head. but yeah, so they had a daughter together, and her husband unfortunately died in 1843, and they had to cut quite a few debts, so maybe their relationship wasn't the best. But she was given an award by the Royal Literary Fund, and received deservedly gained pension of £100 a year from the Civil List. And she is buried in London, and she has a blue plaque at the house where she and her husband lived. If you live in England, there are blue plaques that get placed on really on houses and places where famous people have lived or worked. And so she has a blue plaque, which is pretty cool. But yeah, she has a whole huge list of Young Lady's Book of Botany, Gardening for Ladies, and Companions to the Flower Garden. She's like a whole series of books about botany and flowers and stuff. Scotland uses grey ones. Yeah, so grey plaques, blue plaques. But yeah, it is one book that I would really like to read. It is a chunky one though, and I'm very interested in what it would say. I think there was an interesting... I'll read you the back of what this says. It says, but I think this is her quote. "I found that I have written a strange, wild novel called The Mummy." So this is what the back of the book says. "In the early 19th century, England was gripped by the excitement of both the pharaonic, Napoleonic invasion of Egypt had unearthed treasures and mysteries that spread throughout the public, eager for more. By 1821, the public unwrapping of Egyptian mummies in a theater near Piccadilly drew excited crowds. But it was not only this new obsession with the exotic that gripped the public with the publication of 1818's Mary Shelley's Frankenstein that a new thrill had been found, the Gothic. From these twin obsessions came Jane London's The Mummy, published anonymously in 3 volumes when the author was only 17 years old. The Mummy is, as she describes herself, a strange, wild novel that, to an audience nearer her future than when London imagined it, is filled with striking similarities to our modern world, including a form of the internet. But it is also filled with brilliant flights of fancy. Her court ladies wear hair ornaments of controlled flame, surgeons and lawyers may be steam-powered automatons, people holiday by moving their entire homes on rails. The visionary technological setting contrasts with a morality seemingly gone awry as it falls to the reanimated mummy Cheops to try to find a role in this corrupted society. A lost curio of Victorian futurism waiting to be discovered, The Mummy is a bizarre and entertaining as its premise promises, and more." Yeah, like predicting RV. Yeah, like just some really wild, crazy stuff in this book. But yeah, so that is one of kind of these huge books that kind of started out this secondary type of curse with the reanimated version of a corpse. Then we have a couple other options as well, including right here, Lost in a Pyramid or The Mummy's Curse by Louisa May Alcott. She may have developed a fully formed Mummy's Curse plots in this book from 1969. And this book was actually forgotten and then only rediscovered in the 1990s. So I don't even know much about this book. I might have to look it up. Well, you know what? We might as well. We've been looking up these books. Let me see if I can look up this book because I want to know what it's about. So this one is called Lost in a Pyramid or The Mummy's Curse. Short story written by Louisa May Alcott and published in 1869. Largely overlooked throughout the 20th century, it was rediscovered in 1998 and has since become an influential example of early mummy curse narratives. No, she was not. I need to figure out why. Oh, sorry, it broke the link. Thank you, Alex, though. I'll pull up the Wikipedia so we can read it together. Yeah, sorry, 1869 is when it was published. Did I say 1969? That was my fault if I did. I love how it's like written in late 1868 or the first week of 1869. And so under the initials LMA, written concurrently with Little Women. Alcott's interest in Egypt carried over into the novel where, according to the Louisa May Alcott Encyclopedia, Jo March attended a lecture on the pyramids which inspired her to use an exotic backdrops in modern sensational stories. I did not know that. I have never read Little Women, so I should look that up. But here is the plot summary. After an expedition to Egypt with his colleague Professor Niles, that's a little bit too on the nose for me, Paul Forsyth returns to his fiancée Evelyn with a mysterious box of scarlet seeds. He warns her that the story of their origin will haunt her, but her curiosity prevails. I said naive. Curiosity prevails. Despite fatigue and growing weariness, he follows the insatiable Nile deep into the pyramid of Cheops. The two decide to lie in the sand and rest while Nile's guide, Jamal, seeks another guide to lead Forsyth to safety. He plunges further into the labyrinth in search of Niles, whom he finds lost and despairing. He breaks his leg in a fall. Fearing for his life, the two resolve to start a fire in order to single Jamal. They're like in the pyramid? What? Okay. They burn a wooden coffin and unroll the wrappings of a mummified woman inside, where they discover a box of seeds. Despite the reservations, they throw the mummy on the fire. And then Jamal rescues them, who have lost consciousness from the fumes. That's not that out there. But he keeps the box as a souvenir. And later they decipher a piece of the parchment which identifies the woman as a powerful sorceress who has vowed to curse anyone who dares to disturb her grave. Evelyn then asks to plant the seeds. Okay, but he throws them in the fireplace, fearing they may be cursed or poisonous. He reveals that Niles has had some bad luck, but the happy lovers don't think that much of it. And then 3 months later, Forsyth remarks to Evelyn on their wedding day that she has grown frail and sickly. She confides that she feels like she is dying, but he dismisses her ailment as bridal nerves. What a man. What a man. He reveals that one seed had escaped the fire after all, and after being sent to Niles, it had bloomed into an unusual white flower. She surprises him by revealing that she had grown her own strange flower in her boudoir, and that she intends to wear it during the wedding, which he cautions her against. She appears at the ceremony with renewed vivacity, but later falls into a swoon, revealing the flower pinned to her breast. An urgent letter arrives from a friend of Niles, bringing news of the professor's death after wearing his own flower, which was later pronounced to be a lethal poison which drains the vitality of the wearer. Evelyn falls into a catatonic state of death in life, and Forsyth secludes himself to tend to his insensate wife. So unlike the Jane London book, this has nothing to do with mummies being revived. This is what I would call a real mummy curse story, or a mummy curse narrative, because it is essentially about not a mummy coming alive, but that they do something to disturb them and they are cursed from that. And so there is these kind of differences in like reception to like what a mummy curse is. I want to see how they rediscovered it. It received little attention throughout most of the 20th century. Rediscovering the story in the late 1990s, Dominic Montserrat believed Alcott to be the first to utilize a fully fleshed out mummy curse narrative. Apparently Alcott, but somebody else suggests that Alcott followed the plot of something called The Mummy's Foot, conceding that the story is an unusually early and female-authored example of Egyptianizing thriller, later dominated by male writers such as Bram Stoker, Arthur Conan Doyle, and H. Rider Haggard. Remember those? Bram Stoker is obviously who writes Dracula. Arthur Conan Doyle is, you know what I'm talking about. Gautier, thank you. Obviously Sherlock, and then H. Haggard was the other person that we mentioned, who wrote stories about mummy curses. So then it's conversely, somebody else argues that the tradition in which Alcott writes was not always so male-centric, pointing to the anonymously published story The Mummy's Soul in 1862 and Jane G. Austen's After 3,000 Years, where female mummies exact revenge on male desecrators. Day proposes that along with Alcott's these proto-feminist curse stories establish an analogy between desecration of tombs and rape. Very interesting. Isn't half bad of story. They call it horror, but it's a tad on the silly side at points. I will actually read that later. Thank you. So yeah, as I continue on, okay, we're going to Tut next. these ones that I just mentioned, The Mummy's Soul in 1862 and After 3,000 Years, all have similar plots, but it's all about female mummies taking it out on other desecrators, on male desecrators, which is a very interesting plot, like subplot to the whole thing. And so those are the main ones that were published on or before all before the time period of King Tut's, and when many people nowadays would say that the modern curse theories come from. So this is just kind of all of the huge basis that I'm showing you, that these curse theories are much older than King Tut's discovery. But mentioning King Tut, let's get into him. I'm gonna take a quick little water break because my throat is dry. Any questions so far? Feel free to throw them out while I'm chugging this water. Pretty much the rest of it is just all about King Tut. So feel free to throw out any more mummy curse theories or questions. Tutti Frutti. I love it. They call him Tutti Frutti. Honestly, probably my favorite thing about the discovery of King Tut is that they did not know for several years if he was an old man or a kid. Like, they didn't know he was a kid. And so my favorite thing is that there was a song called Old King Tut, where they was a kooky old nut, I think is like how the song keeps going. And so like the theory is that like they just assumed he was a really old man, and then they opened him up and they were like, what? But yeah, now we know him as the Boy King, is the other way that they go around. You can find the song, actually. They put their songs on YouTube. You can look it up. It's like this old 1920s kind of jazzy Old King Tut was a kooky old nut or something like that. Oh. All right, King Tut. Born in Arizona, moved to Babylonia, King Tut. We love a Steve Martin song. So, the Tomb of Tutankhamun was discovered and opened in 1922. We just had its 100th anniversary. What time is it now? We're now in 20. We're not yet at the 100th anniversary of them opening up his coffin, or maybe even opening up the burial chamber. I have to look at my timeline. Actually, I'll pull up my timeline because the timeline is kind of interesting. I can't play the whole song because I'm worried that I will get copyrighted. But yes, that's we got that small little portion. Thank you for playing that, Nat. Let me see. Where would that thing be? Finished projects. Somewhere here I have a timeline. Thought I had a timeline. Alright, well, I have something here. So, because of the toots. I don't know if they explicitly had, I think they had like green beans, kind of. I think they had peas, which I think is really close to beans, but I don't know what else they kind of had. Oh, no, that's not what I wanted. I wanted this. Okay, so I'm looking for, so this is my document that I had all of my lectures about the King Tut series, which unfortunately did not do very well, so I did not publish a lot. Well, I did a lot of them, but we were getting to like later parts. So I wanted to see somewhere down here is so the 100th anniversary on January 9th, they agreed that Carnarvon had an agreement with the media in England In February, they opened the doorway leading to the burial chamber, and they officially opened the burial chamber on the 17th. March of 23, they had Howard Carter got in a huge fight with all of them, and they had a huge fight, and he pretty much quit the whole thing. And then, which we are going to talk about, April 15th. So this past April was the 100 years anniversary of Lord Carnarvon's death. And then women are banned from the tomb, if you didn't know that one. And somewhere down here is Carter didn't start resuming work on the tomb until January 25th, 1925. The tomb sat there for about 2 years. And then eventually, I thought I had the day. Oh, the inner coffin of the mummy is open, revealing the mummy is in March 18th, 1925. So very, very later, very much later after the actual discovery, 3 years later almost. Thanks, Alex, for giving all the different vegetables. So, the curse of amateur. Welcome. I need to text you. It's on my to-do list for tomorrow. We gotta make a meeting. But thank you so much for resubscribing for 26 months. Hope you are having a fun day. I know you have a big event on the 4th of July. I know. Camp is over. I have a whole week. I don't start my new job until a week from today. So it's been on my to-do list. I need to email Anne first, and then I will, well, I'll text you anyway, but we need to set up a meeting, and then I need to email Anne, so we can get started on this whole event and all that and everything. We're talking about mummy curse theories. We just got to King Tut, which is the last one we're going to talk about. No, we're making this very casual because I've discovered that I wrote this lecture whole thing like literally 2 years ago, and I realized there's so many typos and I'm just winging it at this point, based on my knowledge of it and everything. Thank you, Nana Net, for posting that. So the mummy curse theory that surrounds King Tutankhamun is directly based off of the deaths of many people who worked in and around the tomb. There are also a lot of rumors, and many of these do not happen very immediately after when the tomb was opened. Again, 1922 is when it was opened. Some of these deaths do not occur for many years. Supposedly, James Henry Breasted, who was another Egyptologist working in Egypt, he reported that a messenger saw a cobra kill Howard Carter's pet canary, and this fueled a lot of rumors. I don't even know where that information comes from, and it just seems to be... Thank you, Claire, for coming by. Feel free to lurk. But an Egyptian novelist wrote in the New York World. Joe Black, thank you so much for the follow. Welcome to the stream. We're talking about mummy curse theories. We've just reached King Tut. We're going to talk about King Tut a little bit. So, an English novelist wrote in the New York World 2 weeks after the tomb was discovered, and he was quoting an obscure book which claimed that dire punishment would follow any intrusion of a sealed tomb. A cobra was found in the cage with a dead bird in its mouth. Thank you, Alex, for looking that up for me. But yes, which I hate to say it, cobras want to kill birds. A canary that probably is not even native to Egypt, cobra's gonna go kill it. So, not a curse. But essentially, this novelist, 2 weeks after the tomb was opened, publishes this thing with a very obscure book that claims that there will be dire punishment to anyone who intrudes and such. And it fueled a lot of local rumors. And sorry, not local rumors. It fueled a media frenzy from there. And don't forget, like, this is one thing that I don't think a lot of people know about the King Tut discovery, but when the King Tut discovery was made, Lord Carnarvon, it took him a couple months, again, because it was discovered in November. November is when it was discovered. But by February of 1923, Lord Carnarvon, who was the financier of the entire expedition, he gave exclusive sole rights to one English newspaper, essentially making a monopoly, so that only one newspaper was getting all of the correct information. And granted, I won't even say correct information, but the most accurate to that time. This was happening on a day-to-day basis, that they were pulling things out of this tomb, they were examining things of this tomb, preserving them, conserving them, and then putting them into storage to, like, prepare. And the whole thing is that, like, this was a 4-roomed tomb. They could not get to the other 3 rooms without going through and investigating all of the pieces in that tomb. And so they were only working off of information, like, they could not get all of the context out when the media was asking them for questions. So this is why very, very frequently the media and normal non-archaeologists do not hear about really big discoveries until after the excavation has concluded, or even after the paper has been written about the excavation. So in this time, because this was such a huge discovery, the media were trying to get updates every single day to send to newspapers, but they did not, the archaeologists at the time did not have the context that they could get for each, like, every single day. Like, every single day they could have very easily changed it. I mean, because this was a pharaoh, everything was frequently labeled with his name, just again to, like, reiterate his name and make him seem like extremely powerful. But if these things weren't labeled with his name until you got to the burial chamber, they could have been releasing all of this different information about who this person was for literal months, and then getting to years. The burial chamber was not opened for a year. Like, it took so long for this excavation to take place that the media probably just, like, went absolutely crazy. Ooh, thank you, Alex. The famous Egyptologist James Henry Breast worked with Carter soon after the first opening of the tomb. He reported how Carter sent a messenger on an errand to his house. On approaching his home, the messenger thought he heard a faint, almost human cry. Upon reaching the entrance, he saw the birdcage occupied by a cobra, the symbol of Egyptian monarchy. Carter's canary had died in its mouth, and this fueled local rumors of a curse. Arthur Weigall, a previous Inspector General of the Antiquities of the Egyptian government, reported that this was interpreted as Carter's house being broken into by the royal cobra, the same as that one that is worn on the king's head to strike his enemies on the very day that the king's tomb was broken into. Yep, that, hate to say it, I can understand that one. That one at least makes a little bit more sense to me in my head. But yeah, so it was... that sparked local rumors with a lot of locals, and then this guy writing about, like, the super obscure dire punishment and stuff would absolutely extend these theories more abroad. And then the access that every other newspaper was clamoring to get this story and would literally talk to anyone, because of course they couldn't talk to the real people because Carnarvon sold exclusive rights to one newspaper. So I mean, if you all can take anything out of this, is that almost all mummy curse theories that I have ever seen, like, in popular media, have all been started by the British tabloids. Which sounds crazy, but it is a little crazy. So the first death that occurred based off of this mummy curse theory was Lord Carnarvon, who you can see here. This is Howard Carter with the dark mustache, and this is Lord Carnarvon. This is also Lady Carnarvon as well. He had been bitten by a mosquito, and later he had been bitten by a mosquito on his face, and it later was slashed while he was shaving. And this essentially became infected, and he died of blood poisoning. And this was 6 weeks after the discovery. This was very, very recent. And the whole thing, there are the back and forth that he was bitten by a mosquito in the tomb. Carnarvon did not do any of the excavating. He was there frequently when the tomb was being excavated, mostly because he was showing people around. He was the financier of this whole situation. He had an okay knowledge of Egyptian history and Egyptian stuff because he had been Howard Carter's financier for many, many years, but he was not actually doing any of the excavating. And it is obviously not... It's not totally confirmed if he got that mosquito bite in the tomb, which you will hear the frequent thing that he was bitten in the tomb from a mosquito that had survived in the tomb since ancient times. I have heard that rumor, and that is so many different reasons of untrue. Whether or not it was in the tomb and it had floated in there because the tomb door was wide open is a different story. But he was bit by a mosquito, and that wound became infected within the 6 weeks after the tomb was discovered. Fun fact, if you ever watch Downton Abbey and you know the house that they film, at least the outside of, that is Lord Carnarvon's house. That is the lordship of Carnarvon, and I realize I'm still saying it wrong. I had to change it when I was saying it on those videos. He's Welsh. It is a Welsh title, and so that castle that they film, at least the outside view of, that you see in Downton Abbey, it is his house, and there is actually some Egyptian objects in that house if you go and visit it today, because he had a collection, obviously, some of which have been taken from King Tut's tomb, which we found out later. Thank you so much, Sharon Ann Palmer, for the follow. Welcome to the stream. Thank you for joining us. I think you joined us from TikTok. Hi, Karnika. Always surprised me that there are mosquitoes in the desert. Then you remember how close. Yeah, there are mosquitoes. I mean, I think it's honestly ironic, and it does, unfortunately, kind of support the curse theory that we know that King Tutankhamun had a serious bout of malaria. Probably, I think 3 times we think he had malaria. And that seriously weakened his immune system and might have contributed to his death. So that's just very funny. Oh, well, thank you, Sharon, for following us on Twitch. It is easier. I always stream on TikTok, even though it is easier to see everything over here on Twitch. So I'm very glad you have joined us over here. So blood poisoning into pneumonia. And he died on April 5th, 1923. So, our little friend, Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, again, has to say something about this. He suggests that his death was caused by the elementals created by Tut's priests to guard the tomb. So, Sir Arthur Conan Doyle just really, really believed that there were these elementals, which I think is his equivalent word for ghosts, that he really believed that these elementals would curse people. And I really I think a lot of this can be pointed to him because we've already encountered him in 2 of these different mummy curse theories, that he has to do with a lot of these rumors spreading. And people also, again, it's because he was an author and he had a voice and he was a celebrity of the time, people listened to him, and I think this kept these things going. So apparently, when the tomb was discovered, a reporter, supposedly this was H.V. Morton, said that he would give Lord Carnarvon 6 weeks to live, and that is a very huge rumor, but it would be a little ironic if that was true. And There is also apparently a skin lesion that is on King Tutankhamun's face, but they were unable to compare it to Lord Carnarvon's own skin lesion on his face. So it's, again, just like all of these different things that I think people just talked about or just said that span into full-blown rumors. So, let me see. Some of the other deaths that followed that people attribute to the King Tutankhamun's mummy's curse. George J. Gould I, who was a visitor of the tomb, he died in the French Riviera in 1923 after he developed a fever after his visit to Egypt. So again, 1923, within a couple months. Again, it was the tomb was discovered in November 1922. Lord Carnarvon died April 5th, 1923. But this guy died in sometime in 1923, so I guess within the year, we'll say. Then we have A.C. Mace in the center. He was a member of the excavation team. I have a whole TikTok video about him. He was absolutely vital for we can all celebrate Lord Carnarvon's death day and your birthday together, Anna. Wouldn't that be great? So A.C. Mace was absolutely vital to this excavation because he was our conservationist, and we can attribute that many of the pieces, not all, but many of the pieces of Tutankhamun's collection are very well preserved today because of he was honestly like kind of a revolutionary in that field of conservation, and he was doing it in the field, like, rather than a lot of times with conservation pieces is that the pieces get sent to a museum, and then if they want to go on display, they get evaluated by a conservationist, and they'll say, these are my suggestions to make this stable to go on display. But he was, I mean, literally conserving these pieces almost immediately after they were being brought out of the tomb and photographed. So he died in April 1928, several years obviously after the tomb was discovered. And then we have Captain the Honorable Richard Bethel, who was Howard Carter's secretary. He died in November of 1929, another year after that. And he was apparently the victim of a suspected smothering. So I don't know how much that has to do with the mummy's curse, but okay. And then Howard Carter himself, who died, guess how many years? Please, for the love of God, guess how many years he died after the discovery of the tomb, and why people think that he is cursed because he lived. Okay, so Pfizer says 4. Any other guesses for how many years after the discovery of the tomb did Howard Carter live? Because it is honestly a little bit ridiculous that people think that his death had to do anything with the actual curse. Tea Time Cat says 8. Nat says 20. So I'll tell you, it was 16. You guys had it right in the middle, but 16 years after the tomb was discovered, he died. But see, people still think that his death had to do something with the curse. 16 years. Yeah, it's a lazy curse. It's a very lazy mummy. So there is apparently a article in the British Medical Journal from 2002 where they did a study on the survival rates of 44 Westerners who either worked on or visited the tomb. And of course, they have to say Westerners because if you guys didn't know, I did a TikTok video about this. Many of the names of local Egyptians who worked on this excavation were not recorded. We luckily have, I think, 5 or 6 names of the foremen of people of local Egyptians who were essentially in charge of larger groups of Egyptians, because Howard Carter thanked them in his book, in one of his books, like I think the first volume of the multi-volume book that he published. So we do have their names, but many of the other potentially thousands of Egyptians that worked on these tombs, we do not have their names. So of course we do not have any sort of basis that if any of these people, men, women, or children died because of the tomb. So the study is obviously only focused on the Westerners who were notably celebrity or famous or very, 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 very rich. So this article found that there was no association between potential exposure to the mummy's curse and survival, which, I hate to say it, makes sense. You would also be a little slow. And King Tut supposedly had some walking problems, so yeah. No? Okay. Supposedly, in 1925, Carter gave his friend a paperweight of a mummy's hand with a scarab bracelet saying, "Cursed be he who moved my body, to him shall come fire, water, and pestilence." And apparently, Henry Ingram's house burnt down and was flooded after it was rebuilt. Why? Who did? What? I don't know why that line is in there. Maybe that was from earlier, Henry Ingram or whatever. I don't know. I can't understand any of the notes that I wrote for this. I don't care at this point. But we know Howard Carter didn't really believe in curses. So, Centhouse, thank you so much for resubscribing. What does this button do? So, my whole thing, which I didn't have any time to talk about mummy curse theories that are in a slightly more modern setting, because many of these are obviously highly fictionalized and stuff. Two of these, I believe, come from a very bad, like, Indiana Jones parody. Two of these gifts, and the other one I think is from The Mummy. But that is kind of the end of the stream. But please send me some questions if you guys have any questions about it. So what I was talking about, Zenthouse, is we were talking about mummy curse theories about, there are two kind of viewpoints of it. There are either the revived mummy, the mummy coming back to life to attack people and stuff, or the more popular one is that mummy curses are the deceased mummy is cursing you from the afterlife, and it's some form of misfortune. So hysterically, it does not always include death, it does not always include disease, but it also includes financial misfortune. You could just lose all of your money, or you could like get your arm amputated because you had like an accident or something. And so like the original mummy curse theories are all like they range from any sort of misfortune, and even misfortune to your relatives as well. I know there was that one where his fiance decided to leave him, and then she got ill, and then she died, and like there's all these different stuff like that. Aspergillus fungus was responsible for several deaths. So that is that the fungus that the weird fungus that's supposedly on the walls of the burial chamber? Is that what that is? Thank you, Tea Time Cat. Thank you, Nat. But yeah, there's like a ton. Obviously, my big thing, I just like, I think these are interesting. It's definitely within my knowledge of Egyptomania and stuff. Like I love learning about Egyptomania. I love learning about why things became popular, why things became crazy and stuff. And so my one thing is that I always, like, I don't mind talking about mummy curse theories. Like, I think they are interesting. I always call them theories, and you'll hear me say that. I always call them theories. But I also really like, the one thing that I would want you guys to take away from this is that King Tut's is not the first mummy curse theory. That there are two strong mummy curse theories prior to that, as well as more fictionalized accounts of mummy curse theories to then spur real, like, mummy curse theories and such. Normally human body can fight it off, but if you have a weakened immune system or have, say, a lung infection or pneumonia, it could. So actually, Alex, that is a really good point. I forgot to mention that Lord Carnarvon had actually had he had already had a very weak immune system. I remember when I did research for the video on him, he was in like a car accident or something when he was like kind of not young, but like kind of older, and he had always had, and essentially that accident that he was in weakened him somehow, supposedly with his lungs, if I remember correctly, and that is what prompted his doctors to tell him to go to Egypt for the first time. Because if you guys know, around that time period, the late 1800s, and even sometimes earlier than that, it was really frequent for people with consumption, people with lung problems, to be told to go somewhere more dry. And so it is a really big reason why people would go to Egypt a lot, because they would go there to like get well and stuff. And a lot of people then got very interested in Egypt, and that kind of snowballed from there. And so Lord Carnarvon would have never gone to Egypt if he wasn't in this like accident, possibly. And so I think, I mean, I don't think that is the worst theory ever, because supposedly it was the blood poisoning with the pneumonia. Like, I don't think that is the worst theory ever, that if that fungus if we have evidence that that fungus was inside the tomb, like, I think that is quite reasonable, because supposedly he was not always of the best health. And yeah, we do have theories on whether or not that you can get like toxins and other bacterias from ancient remains and such. Yeah, so I'm really glad Tutankhamun, because I think, to be honest, I think the Titanic one is so much more interesting than King Tut's curse, because I weirdly think it has a little bit more validity. Like, not that much more validity, but a little bit, it makes a little bit more sense. But especially with the knowledge that we know that some guy told this theory the night the Titanic sank. Like, it almost makes sense why that rumor got started, when, like, I can understand that the rumor would get started with Lord Carnarvon. I can understand that. Within 6 weeks' time, yeah, I can understand that. But adding all of these other people that are years and years after makes no sense to me. The Titanic was so interesting. It is just so wild, and like, we almost have a really concrete record as to how a rumor got started, which I don't think it's totally rare, but I think it's just really exciting that we have something like that we have evidence of how a really crazy ghost story essentially was started. Because sometimes there are so many of things that we don't have evidence. We're like, where did this even get started? Where did the rumor train begin?